Are you ready, son?
I'm ready.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. Thank you for joining us, the world's most beloved father and son Formula One podcast. We've just finished an exciting race in Saudi Arabia, and we want to share our thoughts with you. Patrick, in 3 words, can you describe that Saudi Arabia Grand Prix we just saw?
Yeah, my 3 words, I don't think it's very surprising, is Max and Charles. We are setting up for another season of epic battles between 2 great drivers. Last year we had Max and Lewis came all the way down to the final lap of the final race, and it's through the first 2 races setting up to be a similar case with Max and Charles Leclerc. I mean, these 2 guys are going head to head. They have pulled away from both of their teammates in both of the first 2 races. Unfortunately, some reliability issues last week for Red Bull, but these 2 young drivers are just, I don't know, they look by far like the 2 best drivers on the grid.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Darn shame what happened to Red Bull last week. Both Max and Sergio having to retire. Who knows if that's going to ruin, just in 2 races in, if that's going to ruin Red Bull's chances for constructors or Max's chances to repeat. But these have been some great battles. I mean, this race, it was Max and Charles. The whole race came down to the last lap. Loved it. Last week, it was similar. So I think I'll have to go with you. If I were to describe this race in 3 words, Max versus Charles. We could say, because there were some other great battles, Alonso versus everybody. He was battling his teammate. He was battling Magnussen. And then, unfortunately, he battled that Alpine reliability, and that was a battle he lost. But that was another great one. What do you think about Lewis Hamilton? At the end of the race, it almost seemed that he made a snide remark about his team. And I think that is a rare statement from Lewis. And even though I think a lot of us, we've seen Mercedes do so well for so long, we're sort of operating under the assumption that, well, Mercedes will fix this and they'll be at the front of the pack again. Okay, there's 2 more weeks until the next race. They'll fix this and be at the front of the pack again. Lewis was visibly frustrated at his team, and you don't see that often.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the last 7 years, a lot of Lewis's deficiencies, few as they may be, and Toto's deficiencies and just sort of the team's overall weak points have been sort of shadowed by how unbelievably good their car is. And some of the strategic calls that have been made and some of, the little minor mistakes that Hamilton has made on track, they don't really show up at all because it's so easy for that car to make up against, the rest of the competition. But now that car looks like it's sort of off pace from the top 2 teams, Ferrari and Red Bull. They don't have that luxury to make any mistakes. And through the first 2 races, I think both Lewis and the team have made a number of mistakes that have been costly. I mean, Lewis in qualifying was poor, and that's on him. I mean, you can say the car wasn't set up the best it was, but he didn't make it out of Q1.
Right.
That's on him. And, then throughout the race, he actually, I thought, had a pretty darn good race for where he started. And, he looked after his tires and I think got pretty unlucky with that pit lane entry closure during the virtual safety car. But even so, when you're starting at the back of the grid and don't have far and away the best car, it's a little bit harder to make up those places.
Yeah, he's had a tough week. My assumption was this was the frustration boiling over, coupled with him sort of publicly calling out the team that we now have 2 weeks. You've got to make this right. So I think it was part frustration on his part and part calling out the team. Although, as you said, having the fastest car for the last 7, 8 years, it does cover up a lot of weaknesses and cover up a lot of mistakes. But I think we are seeing now in a car that's no better than all the rest, that Lewis is not at his peak the way he was. I think going back to your earlier point, it's definitely Charles and Max sort of above everyone else, including their own teammates. What did you think of, speaking of teammates, Perez had that great qualifying. He had pole, he had a great start. He did get screwed a bit when Mazepin crashed yet again. And so I just sort of wanted to get your thoughts on that. Like, Perez is having some bad luck. Mazepin, I'm just not sure there's a need to keep him in that seat.
Yeah, I mean, Perez definitely got unlucky. I think Ferrari and Leclerc sort of baited him into making that pit stop. And, maybe it would have worked out okay had Latifi not done a Latifi thing to do.
Right. He's this year's Mazepin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, 2 times into the wall in 2 days. That's pretty rough in that Williams. But going back to Perez, I mean, yeah, he had great qualifying, had a great start to the race, got unlucky with that, but he came out 4th, and then he didn't do anything for the rest of the race. So sure, he got unlucky, but Verstappen was battling with Leclerc the entire race. Perez came at Sainz maybe 1 or 2 times, but he never did anything. If he really wants to be seen as one of the top drivers, I think in those moments, you have to take advantage of them. You can't get a little bit unlucky in the race, but then, just rest on your laurels and sit there for the rest of the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think he could have challenged Sainz more. He did have a car that could compete. He got screwed on the Latifi crash. They had the virtual safety car. And then I think that they brought an actual safety car, if memory serves. But you're right. He just sort of kept comfortably in that 4th spot. Whereas alternatively, I love that Alpine was fine with the Ocon Alonso battles. Those two teammates just going at it. Alonso, one of the all-time greats. He knows he's not in a great car. And so he's like, well, I'm going to get the most out of this car as possible. And even, chase down my own teammate. Ocon, a younger driver, to his credit, he's sort of a steady and well-reasoned driver, but he's never shown sort of an aggressiveness. And this one, I thought he was defending well, even defending aggressively. And that was against his own teammate. So that was a real fun battle to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I think both of them drove tough but fair, and really, it provided some early excitement in the race. And their battle with each other let a couple other drivers get into it, and Bottas and Magnussen came back, and so we had some really good racing early on in the race. And it's just fun to see. I think, like you said, Alonso has been such a great driver throughout his career, and Ocon, he doesn't want to be seen as the second driver in that team, and so he's not gonna let Alonso push him around at all. And both of them had pace, and they both just wanted to go for it. And I think it's exciting that the team, that Alpine, let them do it and had faith in their drivers that they weren't going to do anything catastrophically stupid. And neither one did. I mean, it was fun.
It was. It was. And, it's funny because there was an incident before the race during qualifying, I believe. May have even been a terrorist act. I'm still not sure. And there was talk of, canceling the race. And rumors are several of the owners and sponsors said we absolutely cannot. But this turned out to be a really fun race at the lead, mid-pack battles. So I'm really glad we got to watch this. Why don't you start? I want to go over who we think were the top 10 in this race, Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. Who do you have as your top 10?
Yeah, like you said, it was a good race, start to finish. We saw a couple of drivers pull away, lots of mid-pack battles, and plenty of retirements as well. So it had everything. My top 10, starting from the very top, it's got to be Max Verstappen. Had an awesome race. Came back from a disappointing retirement last week, and he was competing with that really quick Ferrari the whole race, and finally made his move stick over Leclerc, which was good to see. Then I have Charles Leclerc, just another excellent performance from him. He looks just so relaxed and composed in that car. And, he didn't even really get flustered when Verstappen was hunting him down and putting pressure on him. He seems like a very cerebral driver to me. And, it was a little bit unfortunate. He got a little bit unlucky right at the end there with the Albon and Stroll accident. I think he really could have made a run at Verstappen in the second to last lap. But second place is nothing to scoff at.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the good term, cerebral driver, I think Max is a slightly better driver, but that Ferrari might have slightly better pace, and so, last week we were sort of robbed of, Charles Max 1-2 because Red Bull died there near the end, but, yeah, I'm with you right so far. Max, best driver of the day, Charles, number 2. Yeah, who else you got?
Nice. Then at three, maybe a little bit of a surprise, I have Pierre Gasly. Early on in the race, he seemed to be struggling a little bit and couldn't get his tires under him. And, that AlphaTauri has had some issues. Obviously, Yuki couldn't even do a lap yesterday in qualifying. He couldn't get a lap in this race, unfortunately for him. But, it held up, and Gasly, he got some really good points for that team. He's just another guy that continues to be impressive, I think, and put in really solid performances every single race.
Yeah, we've got so many great young drivers, and it's hard to see any of them out of F1 anytime soon. They're just so good. I mean, you think Max is, I think, 24. Charles and Gasly are both young, probably about 25. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Albon, George Russell, just so much young talent in the sport. It's great to see. I have in the third spot George Russell. The Mercedes has been having trouble, but he had great qualifying and a solid race. As it turns out, I do not have Gasly. Gasly sort of had a quietly good race. I think it wasn't until the very end I realized how well he had done. So who do you have as your fourth and fifth?
Yeah, at 4 and 5, I have a couple of other really good young drivers in Esteban Ocon and Lando Norris. Ocon, like we said earlier, was battling with his teammate throughout the race. He had plenty of scraps throughout this race and ended up finishing really well. That Alpine might be sort of the lead mid pack car, it seems like. But, he held his own throughout the race and again got some really good points for his team and finished, just outside the top five in sixth position. I mean, that's a really solid result for Ocon and Alpine.
That is. And before we get your 6 through 10, I'll do my 1 through 5 quick. Max, no surprise. Charles, no surprise. Third, I have Russell. As I said, I thought he had a solid qualifying, solid race. My fourth is Alonso. I love Alonso. He had, a solid qualifying. He just had a great race. He was battling his teammate Ocon. He was battling Magnussen and others, always getting the most out of that car. And then it died on him. Nothing you can do about that. Fifth place, I have Perez. That might be too high, but he did come in fourth place. He did get screwed on the Latifi crash when he had pitted just before. Going against two good Ferrari drivers, two good Ferrari cars, and Max Verstappen, that is not an easy task. And I'd like to see more from him, but I thought he did fine. So I have him in my fifth spot. So who do you have in 6 through 10?
Nice. Yeah. In six, I have George Russell. Like you said, a really solid race. Mercedes hasn't been the Mercedes that we've come to know for the past, 7, 8 years. But Russell kind of in no man's land through the whole race. But, fifth place right there, getting big time points for Mercedes when Hamilton was struggling. That's really good from him.
Yeah, and we've got to say, Red Bull had that crazy double DNF last week that could wind up having a significant impact on Max's chances to repeat, on Red Bull's chances to win the constructors. But credit to Hamilton and Russell especially. Last week they just were steady. They didn't have the best car, and I think they came in third and fourth. This week Russell was fifth and Hamilton 10th. So, if Mercedes corrects their problems, having steady drivers always doing their best, that's really going to help them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. At 7, I have Kevin Magnussen.
Nice.
I'm so excited for him and for Haas this season. I mean, just after all the craziness and frustrating and disappointing season last year, to have some kind of just steady driver in Magnussen come in and perform as well as he has been, getting points again for that team is pretty awesome to see. He just seemed steady throughout the whole race. And he got into some good battles with some really good drivers with Hamilton, and plenty of good scraps from him, and he just looks comfortable and confident in that car, and I think we'll be seeing Haas in the points fairly regularly throughout this season.
Yeah, love to see it. Love to see it. It's good news that Haas, his teammate at Haas, Schumacher, was fine after his bad crash. All right.
For sure. Then I have 8, 9, and 10. I have Sainz, Perez, and Hamilton. I think all those guys put in just solid performances, nothing particularly special, but really good drives. And, Hamilton made it into the points, which, from yesterday's qualifying, you weren't really sure if he was even going to be able to do, which is a surprising thing to think. But he made it in there and put in a good drive overall. And the other two, well off the pace of their teammates, but still to be third and fourth is a really good result.
Yeah, that's great. So you have Max, Charles, Pierre Gasly, Ocon, Lando Norris, George Russell, Kevin Magnussen, love to see that, Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, and Lewis Hamilton. Great. And I have Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, George Russell. Then we veer a bit. I've got Alonso, then Perez, then Norris, then Magnussen. I'm with you. I love to see, Kevin. That was a surprise deal when Haas had to boot out their Russian sponsor and with them Nikita Mazepin. They brought Kevin Magnussen back, and he's really done great. It's great to see Haas getting points. This is 2 races in a row, which really sort of, I think, highlights the failures still at Williams, as well as Albon is driving. His teammate Latifi has been quite poor, and there's just not much getting out of that car. So after Magnussen at 7th, I then have Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz, and then Ocon. So overall, pretty good race. Now, we saw who came out on the podium. It was Max, Charles, and Carlos, but we like to do a virtual podium. Who we think deserves some accolade that's not a driver. Anyone you think deserving of the virtual podium this week?
Yeah, I have a couple of them. One is just kind of silly, and another one I think is pretty important. So I have one, which was Sir Jackie Stewart's outfit on race day. He looked like, I don't know, like a 70s Scottish golfer.
Which he actually is.
Yeah. No, it was fun to see. It was kind of a silly thing to see in Saudi Arabia of all places. But you love to see Sir Jackie Stewart at the races, and I don't know, it was just kind of fun to see him there.
Right. There's an old joke, I think, about, after a nuclear war, the only thing left will be cockroaches and Keith Richards. To me, I'm like, in the year 2100, if F1 is still around, we'll still have Jackie Stewart and Nico Hulkenberg. Somehow, both of them will have a spot on the grid somehow. Awesome. And who else or what else?
Yeah. So I don't know who made the decision, but, there was a marshal that got fired basically before the race because he tweeted out something about Hamilton having a crash like Grosjean did a couple of seasons ago in Bahrain. And, I just appreciate that nobody in Formula One just dismissed that as like, oh, it's just kind of a funny thing. Like, this dude's a marshal and he's hoping that Hamilton has a life threatening crash. Like, I think fans of racing and fans of F1, regardless of, who your favorite driver is, you never want to see anybody have a crash like that. I mean, that was scary to watch. And, you're always thankful when guys get out of the car okay.
Oh yeah, that is a good one. And we haven't figured out the sort of the forgiveness line on social media. It's become our id. We could sort of say whatever thought pops into our head immediately, no matter how awful, no matter how much we don't really mean it, no matter how quickly we wish to take it back. But on the other hand, there are certain things you say where it's like, no, I'm sorry, you're out. You don't get to say that. You don't get to have a position because you said it. So yeah, that's a good one, and good on FIA for getting rid of that marshal. I think for me, virtual podium, visor cam. They all are wearing the visor cam now. I love that angle. I watched the race from using F1 TV this week, and you get to switch around from driver angles. I just love seeing the visor cam, though. Later in the week, F1 will probably post several of those videos, but it's just such an amazing perspective. It really sort of helps give you a better understanding of what these drivers are seeing and doing, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I love those angles. This week I was thinking like, are we at the Belle Isle Indy Grand Prix? Because everybody's just bumping up and down all the time. I mean, it looked like a harsh track, but yeah, no, those angles are just awesome to see.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think the current crop of F1 cars could work on Detroit's Belle Isle, but that sure would be fun to see. Okay, our next segment. I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think about the amazing growth of F1 popularity in America? I mean, it was just a few years ago, you and I watched every race, but didn't know anyone else who watched it, not an American. And I saw that last week, the first race of the season, ESPN had over 1.3 million viewers, which may have been a record for them, which is just amazing. So I want your thoughts on the rise of F1 in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to see the growth of the sport. I think Americans just love live sport. It's just so popular here. Any sport, people will watch it. They love competition, and the more of it you get, the more exciting it becomes. And I think the way that the regulations have changed have helped in that respect. But, there's plenty of other things that have led to the growth of the sport in the States. I mean, from gaining more races in the States. Netflix has put out several different series, obviously Drive to Survive, but then the Schumacher documentary and that kind of stuff. There's such a big market in the US, I think. There's so much growth potential here that F1 is really making a concerted effort to grow into here, like they have in the last 10, 15 years in the Middle East, right? So I think it's really cool to see. It's exciting. And, I'm excited for the continued growth.
Yeah, I watched the race this week on F1 TV, but I started watching some of the pre-race show on ESPN. They essentially just take the Sky News feed. But I can remember just a few years ago when the sponsor of ESPN's pre F1 race show was some, I don't know, regional auto company, someone I've never even heard of, and now this week it's CrowdStrike, a giant tech company. All the American giant tech companies are getting involved. Oracle's now a massive sponsor of Red Bull. So we're really seeing both the money side and the people side. And that's really going to alter F1. Social media dominance in America. For all the great work that Sky Sports does, ESPN is simply a bigger, more powerful presence, and they're getting involved. We're now, a year away from having 3 races in the US, Austin, and this year Miami, and next year we add to that Las Vegas. There's the possibility we keep hearing that Mario Andretti will buy a team. He's got a group of American investors lined up to take over probably the Alfa Romeo team. So, as big as F1 has gotten in the US, I think we've only just begun. I think there's going to be more people, more money every week. How that alters the sport, I'm not sure. Certainly, it will become more wealthy and more corporate. That means it probably will become technically better. I can't say it will necessarily be more fun.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And I think it's it's crazy to think that 3, 4, 5 years ago, we were saying like, Austin is nice and all, but there really should be a race in Miami or Vegas. And now all of a sudden we get both of them,
Yep.
which is, I mean, that's just fun and exciting. And I can't wait for both of those races to be on a calendar.
Yeah, that's going to be great. So, our next segment, Across the Line, that's where you and I make our predictions for next race. The next race is in 2 weeks in Melbourne, Australia. We choose who we think will be in the top 5. Do you want to go over the current results and sort of explain how we do this?
Yeah, so we've done 2 weeks so far. So basically, we decide who we think should be in the top 5, and we have a little draft. So once we pick a driver, the other person can't pick them. So we'll each pick a top 5. That means 10 drivers will get picked total, and points are awarded based on their finishing. So if we get the driver in the top 5 in the correct position, we'll get 3 points for that. If we do pick a driver that is in the top 5 but doesn't finish in the exact position that we picked them in, we'll get 1 point for that. So, like I said, we're 2 weeks in. Currently, I lead,
Ooh.
surprisingly, 11-10.
Ooh, it's close.
Yeah, so I had 6 in the first week and 5 this week. You had 4 in the first week and 6 this week.
Nice. I think you get to draw first.
I believe I drew first last week.
Oh,
so
okay.
I will let you go first.
Then I am going to go with Max. I think it's a coin toss right now. Who has the faster car? Who's the better driver? I'm going to go with Max. So, and number 1, who do you have for 1 and 2?
Nice. Yep, that's good. I think you're right. It's a bit of a coin toss. So I think I have to go with the other guy that's been putting in the work, and that's Leclerc at number 1.
Awesome. Yeah, these are sort of obvious picks. What about number 2?
Yeah, number 2, I think, that's such a tough one. But, Ferrari has had a step, it seems like, on Red Bull, and it's tough to say at Albert Park which car is going to be better. I think Ferrari might be just a touch better, so I'm going to take Carlos Sainz and have a Ferrari 1-2 finish.
Oh, another Ferrari 1-2. That would be fun. For me, number 2, I'm not going to go with Sergio. I think Mercedes is slowly but steadily improving their car. I think it will have significant improvement in Melbourne. However, I think George is slightly out racing Lewis, and so I'm going to go with George Russell in second, and then I'll pick Sergio Perez for my third.
Ooh, that's very interesting. Okay, nice. It's kind of hard to think about this because we want to, we get 3 points if we get them in the exact correct position. So maybe Russell doesn't split the Red Bulls, but, maybe Perez does come in third and we have, that kind of deal. So that's tough. I don't know. We've had plenty of drivers look like they can get into the top 3. I think next week we'll have a nice pink car on the podium. And so I'm going to take Alonso.
Ooh.
P3.
Wow, that would be a shocker, a pleasant surprise, but a shocker. Now, what about in 4?
In 4, I'm taking another savvy veteran, potentially the greatest of all time, in Lewis Hamilton.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah, it's hard to count out Lewis in any race, in any car. So you have Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Alonso, Hamilton. I have Max, George, Sergio Perez. So for fourth and fifth, I'm going to go in fourth. Wow, this is tough. Alpine has looked good. You've taken Alonso. I'm going to take Ocon in fourth. And let's see, in the fifth spot. Wow, this is a tough one. In the fifth spot, you mentioned Gasly earlier. He sort of had a quietly good race. However, I've trash talked Williams for the past 10 years, but Albon is a good driver. And I think that's going to be my wild card. Somehow, Alex Albon, despite late breaking news that he's taking a grid penalty in Melbourne, I'm going to have him in the fifth spot.
Wow, that would be something if he got in the top 5. I think craziness would have to ensue if that were to happen. But you never know. I'm with you. I would like to pick Gasly. However, I want to throw in a bit of a wild card here. Not quite as crazy as Albon, but I'm going to go with Bottas in 5th.
Oh, nice. Yeah, he had a good race, another good race. He's looked really good. I think Valtteri Bottas should be considered one of the all-time great midfield drivers. It's just that for the previous 5 years, he happened to have the best car ever. So that's a solid pick, and I now regret not choosing him in my fifth spot. But speaking of crazy, any crazy predictions for Melbourne or the rest of the season?
Any crazy predictions? I don't know. I think that here's my crazy prediction. We haven't had a race in Australia for a few years now, which is quite disappointing. And this year, we're not going to have a race in Australia either. It's going to get canceled because of COVID issues.
Wow, that would be terrible. That's
I know.
terrible. That would be terrible if that happens, but that is a good, crazy prediction. So we will see. Yeah, you never know what's going to happen in 2 weeks. And Australia might, they might, just as they did in, I think it was 2019 or 2020, they did this hasty pullout, which is a fine breakfast food in England, by the way, hasty pullout. For me, my crazy prediction, I can't say Australian Danny Ricciardo is going to podium in Melbourne since I just gave my across the line picks. For me, it's COVID related, not as crazy as yours, but the first 2 races of the year, the old veteran Sebastian Vettel has been out because of COVID. I have a feeling he's going to be fine, ready to race, come back and realize he's a multimillionaire with a wife and children and driving that crappy Aston car, and he will announce that this year will be his final season in F1. So that's my one crazy prediction for next week. Okay, son, this was a good talk. It was a good race. I'm looking forward to Melbourne in 2 weeks. And I want to thank our listeners. You've been listening to everybody's most beloved father and son podcast, and we are Lights Out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.